Hello everyone, welcome, good morning. This is our 9th Focus on Food webinar. We had a break for the school holidays last month, so it's great to be back. And this time we are focusing on food hygiene. We've got a couple of new tools I'm trying out for this webinar. So obviously you'll notice that the Q&A facility is available. If you want to submit questions, we've got a lot to get through in the presentation today, but I've put a slide on the end to see if I can answer any questions if we have any time at the end. So if you want to submit some, if I can't get to them during the actual time of the webinar, I'll respond to them when I send out a link to the recording later today. So before I start, I just want to wake everyone up with a quick poll. It's another new thing we're trying today. So this is just about your job function, and if you could just respond when you see it on the screen. So that's a pretty good response rate. Thank you for everybody. Just bring it to a close now and share the results. So you see the vast majority of you have a quality or a technical role. About a third are team leaders, managers, and it's good to see some business owners in there as well. Okay. Thank you for that. So today we'll begin with an overview of hygiene in general before looking at the difference between food hygiene and food safety. We'll take a look at what the regulations have to say about food hygiene and move on to discussing microorganisms, end product, and environmental monitoring testing. The central part of today's presentation will be looking at in detail at hygiene controls, including hand washing, sanitizing, cleaning and sanitizing protocols, the differences between sanitizers and disinfectants, etc. We'll discuss the impact of COVID-19 on hygiene in facilities and look at what additional hygiene protocols could be implemented to protect your business. Rounding off will be a quick look at how culture can help your teams to do the right thing. As I mentioned earlier, if there's any questions that you want to bring up during the presentation, I'll do my best to get to them at the end. But obviously, given the time restrictions, if I can't answer them all during the webinar, I'll certainly respond to them in the email later. So when we talk about hygiene in general, we're referring to practices and behaviours that contribute to breaking the chain of infection transmission in the home, work, and community. Hygiene is defined as the practice of desirable personal behaviours and can include such behaviours as washing hands after using the toilet, after smoking, before eating, not coughing or sneezing on colleagues or food, and ensuring that your clothes and overalls are clean, regular bathing showers, not eating at workstations, using hand sanitizers. So in short, hygiene is all of these practices that interrupt or prevent the spread of communicable diseases and infections. In terms of protecting your product and brand, the hygiene practices are crucial, and each staff member has a vital role to play in ensuring the safety of your products and ultimately those who consume them. Hygiene lapses at the food production level can have serious or fatal consequences, both for consumers, sometimes for businesses involved. It's probably fair to say that most hygiene lapses are not systemic, but the result of someone not doing the right thing, either by not following the protocols or not having the correct training to know what to do. Also, complacency can creep into even well-run and established businesses, so it's really vital to keep reminding staff of the importance of good hygiene practices. Because they can't see microbiological contamination, it's easy to miss and forget about. Ensuring staff are aware of microbiological hazards is a key element in driving compliance to hygiene protocols. The term food hygiene encompasses a range of behaviours that are designed to systematically reduce or eliminate the potential to make food unsafe. And it's defined by the World Health Organization as the conditions and measures necessary to ensure the safety of food from production to consumption. In other words, food hygiene is important across the whole of the supply chain and with the final consumer who handles and cooks it. So you'll often hear food hygiene and food safety spoken of interchangeably. However, they are not strictly the same thing. Food safety refers to all of the practices that businesses must follow to ensure that the food they produce is fit for consumption. Food hygiene is one of those practices. It's a subcategory of food safety. This is why we have food safety plans and not a food hygiene plan. In terms of food hygiene, you have protocols and policies. Food safety planning is a system for managing the risks associated with producing food, such as HACCP plans. Whereas food hygiene refers to the individual set of practices for controlling one aspect of food safety, such as wearing gloves, hair coverings, washing hands, minimizing the risk of introducing microbial contamination to the food. So I've included a few photos here that were taken at routine hygiene inspection of production kitchens and shared use facilities in the UK, kept it distant. We were going to play Spot the Hygiene Infringement, but we don't have long enough today. These are pretty bad examples. Yes, those are cockroaches on the wall in the bottom left-hand photo. So although these photos are from the UK, I've seen some pretty poor examples here in Australia too of unhygienic conditions in both manufacturing and catering facilities. I've been to, over the course of my my working career, I've been to many facilities and seen some absolutely fantastic examples of companies getting it right. But I've also seen some pretty shocking things, such as staff outside smoking in full PPE, hairnets, gloves, beer nets, etc. Staff coming out of the toilet with gloves on and returning to the position on the line. Overflowing bins on the production line, wrongly placed color-coded equipment, mouse droppings in raw materials, managers walking through high care facilities, talking on their phones with no hairnets on, etc., etc. So although a lot of the content in this presentation will seem obvious, it needs reinforcing over and over again so that staff know that in your business you take hygiene very seriously. Now, some of you may run your own home-based or small food business. Perhaps you have shared kitchen facilities, either in a commercial space or at home, where you're sharing with the family. It's vital that you follow good hygiene practices and ensure that you're aware of the risks posed to your business by those that you share with. Always have your own dedicated utensils and tools if you're using shared facilities. Make sure you can sanitize them effectively with a commercial dishwasher or something similar. Keep the dog in the garden when you're working. It's a big step up from cooking for a family who'll eat the food before any bacteria have time to grow to dangerous levels, to then producing food that could be held for days before it gets to the final consumer. So the group of practices known as good hygiene practices include all these things on the slide. Dedicated hand wash sinks is really important. You quite regularly see hand wash sinks being used for practices other than hand washing. Sometimes it's time related, sometimes it just needs someone to tell them that they're not allowed to do that. Obviously, no eating in the production area, and that includes chewing gum. All of these are picked up in the Food Standards Code in Chapter 3. So food hygiene being a component of food safety, the regulations contain the hygiene requirements under the food safety standards in Chapter 3 of the Food Standards Code. Specifically, Standard 3.2.2, which includes the requirements for hygiene practices for those engaged in handling food. So food handlers include anyone who could potentially contaminate the food. So it's defined as a person who directly engages in the handling of food or who handles surfaces likely to come into direct contact with food for a food business. The general requirement is that a food handler must take all reasonable measures not to handle food or food contact surfaces in a way that is likely to compromise the safety and suitability of the food. Apart from ensuring that they're physically well enough to handle food, workers must also ensure that their hands, clothes, and actions don't cause the food to become contaminated. So in the regulations, there's a list of activities that are not to be undertaken around food, such as spitting, sneezing, coughing, either on the food or on the food contact surfaces. This collection of practices and restrictions are known as basic food hygiene. Obviously, there's a requirement to wash your hands whenever they're likely to become a source of contamination of food, using soap and water. What the regulations don't go into specifics about are any details on how food handlers are to know when their hands are likely to be a source of contamination of food. Some instances are clear, such as after using the toilet, we all know about that. However, the regulatory requirements imply that some basic knowledge of microbiology needs to be imparted to your staff in order for them to understand exactly what's meant by contamination and how it works to create a risk in the food. So we'll cover that in the next slide. But as a food business owner or manager or technical manager, your regulatory responsibility is to ensure that you provide sufficient facilities for staff to maintain proper hygiene levels. That includes directing them to hand washing sinks and soap, making sure that's always kept stocked up, paper towels, sanitizing stations, gloves, PPE, etc. We also need to ensure that the staff are sufficiently trained in food hygiene to know whether their actions are a risk to the safety of the food being produced. So there are a large number of microorganisms that are important in food production, and many of them are specific to particular industries and product types. Some of the most commonly found are listed here. It's worth running through just a few of them briefly now. E. coli, common inhabitant of the intestines of warm-blooded animals and humans. Its presence in food is an indicator of recent fecal contamination, either directly or indirectly by feces or contact of feces with contaminated material. It can quite easily become established in processing environments and grow rapidly on improperly cleaned surfaces and in the food that comes into contact with them. E. coli in coliforms are easily killed by heat and sanitizers. So if you do find it in your end product or water during routine testing, there's been a hygiene or a heat treatment breakdown somewhere. This is why it's termed an indicator organism. Now, Salmonella, that's associated with food of animal origins and also foods that have been contaminated by animals. Contamination incidents have been associated with products in the past, such as eggs, poultry, meat, milk and dairy, leafy greens, sprouts, melons, you remember, spices, peanut butter, and depressingly, chocolate. If you're using raw meats in any of your products, salmonella cross-contamination is the reason you use dedicated and separate area to prepare them, away from any cooked or ready-to-eat foods. Cooking will kill salmonella, any salmonella that may be present, and Also, ensuring proper temperature controls will help to prevent the growth. Now, Staphylococcus aureus, they're common on the skin and in the mucosal membranes of humans. So not washing your hands before touching food can introduce staph contamination, as well as coughing or sneezing over the food. At levels of over 100,000 CFUs per gram, it produces an enterotoxin that causes a pretty nasty illness. So great care needs to be taken when handling ready-to-eat foods, especially those that have already undergone a kill step, as this would have removed all of the competition, so they'd be free to grow unrestricted. And Listeria monocytogenes, it's a very problematic organism in the food industry, as it can grow at refrigeration temperatures to less than 5 degrees C, and it can survive for a long time in facilities, years in some cases. It forms biofilms quite easily, and these develop a resistance to sanitizers and disinfectants. Its presence in foods mainly caused by post-processing contamination of food contact surfaces, and again it can cause very nasty illness in humans, particularly for those with chronic diseases, pregnant lactating women, and those whose immune systems are already compromised and suppressed through, for example, cancer drugs, etc. So we've had a few outbreaks here in recent years, notably with rock melons, but also in prepared salads, pate, and smoked salmon. High-risk foods for Listeria monocytogenes are ready-to-eat foods and foods with extended shelf life at refrigerated temperatures. So we've covered pathogenic and spoilage microorganisms in detail in the first 2 webinars in this series, so I won't go through all of them here. Just refer you to those first 2 webinars. So the exact end product testing you choose will depend on a range of factors, including the process. For example, is there a kill step? The product, will your product support the growth of pathogenic bacteria? The packaging, is it aerobic or anaerobic? Storage, will it be chilled, ambient, or frozen, etc. And again, we covered microbiological testing, micro specifications, growth in the first 5 webinars of this series, and these presentations are all available to premium Focus on Food subscribers on our website. As a general indication of process hygiene, the organisms here can provide you with a good deal of actionable information. So Enterobacteriaceae, it's a large family of bacteria that includes pathogens such as Salmonella, as well as many coliform species. That's both pathogenic and non-pathogenic. Their presence doesn't necessarily mean that the product is unfit for consumption, but as they are easily killed off by good hygienic practices and sanitation, their presence in large numbers indicates a process hygiene issue. Enterobacteriaceae are not suitable as a hygiene indicator in ready-to-eat products that contain raw foods, however, as their presence will be high there due to the natural microflora on these types of foods. Moving on, a standard plate count is a general quality indicator. It gives a total count of the aerobic microbes present in a sample of food. It's non-specific in that it doesn't determine whether the microbes are pathogenic or not, but trending results and setting specifications appropriate to the product risk can provide some valuable process hygiene information. Criteria for standard plate counts can be set to detect potential loss of process hygiene control before it leads to contamination of the final product. Testing for yeast and molds will provide information on the ingress of spoilage organisms into the facility and the degree to which they've invaded the final product. As yeast and molds grow much more slowly than bacteria, their presence in high numbers will indicate an issue post-kill step probably. For example, contaminated HVAC system, dust particles on the clothing or hands of workers. The testing for coliforms was traditionally used as an indicator of processing hygiene, but has more recently been overtaken by Enterobacteriaceae because research showed that coliforms can be present in the environment in high numbers and are not exclusively fecal in origin as previously thought. E. coli, however, is found in the intestinal tract of warm-blooded animals and humans, and its presence is a clear indication of recent fecal contamination. Depending on the food being tested, it can be evidence of cross-contamination, poor sanitation, or an inadequate heat treatment. An effective environmental monitoring program provides essential information on the efficiency of general cleaning and sanitation, as well as identifying potential hotspots of microbial activity. There are a number of facets to a good EM program, that's environmental monitoring, including monitoring for transient organisms, that's those that are introduced to the facility through raw materials, water, employees, and resident microorganisms, i.e. they're those that evaded the cleaning and sanitization programs and multiplied to levels whereby they've become established in the facility. These can cause severe contamination incidents. For example, with Listeria biofilms. When undertaking environmental monitoring for hygiene verification, you should adopt a wide variety of testing and sampling methods based on the risk to your product and incorporating results from end product testing to identify potential hotspots or specific organisms of interest. Obviously, bear in mind that you may need different tests for your monitoring than for your end product testing. For example, a qualitative, that's a presence absence test in the end product for Listeria, may become a quantitative test at facility level if you're trying to identify the source of a biofilm or a contamination hotspot. Environmental hygiene sampling should be looking for problem areas by targeting potential growth niches. These are things like the rollers, underneath and in between the rollers, cracks on the food contact surfaces, the inside under the rims in equipment, etc. So you want to be swabbing as wide an area as possible in order to provide actionable information to better target your cleaning and sanitation efforts. So we have another poll. Excuse me, I was just trying to get it up on the screen. We have another quick poll for you now. Question is, does your company have a written environmental monitoring plan? There's only 3 answers. As with previously, all responses are anonymous. I can't see your name, so don't worry about it. Just leave it on for a few more seconds there. Last few of you can get a reply in. Okay. So we can see that obviously most of you have an environmental monitoring plan. Some of you don't, and some of you aren't sure. Thank you for that. Okay, so in terms of work area hygiene, obviously this is an important aspect of food hygiene, and just a few simple notes to remember: just keeping it work area clean and tidy. Always use the correct locations for storage so that you don't have any cross-contamination. Waste needs to be cleared away before the bins get full. The last thing you want is overspilling bins. If you're using color coding, always ensure that the right colors are put back in the right place. No eating or drinking in production areas. In terms of bait boxes, don't disturb them. Report if you see anything around them. That's all fairly straightforward stuff. Now, hand hygiene, we did some swab testing. I always love these things. We did some swab testing of operatives' hands in a food manufacturing facility. Firstly, we swabbed a hand from someone who hadn't washed their hands prior to the swabbing. So this was how they'd been working. They weren't overly dirty, didn't look dirty. And the results can be seen here. So these black dots are ink spots marking a colony forming unit of bacteria. So you can see that there are around 30 colony forming units on this plate. And as we mentioned earlier, hands carry Staphylococcus aureus, but also potentially E. coli, and obviously they're a source of introducing contamination to the food contact surfaces or directly into the food. We then got them to wash their hands with soap and water. So this plate shows the results from testing a swab from the same hands after washing with soap and water. As you can see, there are now only 4 colony forming units growing on the plate. So washing with soap and water reduced the number of viable bacteria by about 87%. And finally, after applying hand sanitizer or sanitizer to the hands, you can see that there were no colonies formed from the swab samples taken then. So often we go into facilities and do this demonstration. We go in a few days before when we're doing hygiene training and take some samples from people. We don't obviously name and shame them, but it's a good visual representation to your staff of how effective hand washing followed by use of sanitizer is in eliminating the number of microorganisms that are present on the hands. Obviously, you need to remember that sanitizer is less effective on dirty surfaces, which is why it's always vital to wash the hands with soap and water first. Always remove the visible contamination and dirt. So the next couple of slides really are ones that you can use in your own training if you want to. When to wash your hands, it's fairly obvious to most of us, but some people do need reminding, obviously after visiting the toilet, before and after preparing food, before eating food, after coughing, sneezing, blowing your nose, before and after treating a wound, or if they become visibly soiled, obviously after smoking and breaks. And the National Health Service in the UK produced quite a useful visual for a hand washing technique, and we always do this to the tune of Happy Birthday to You, which usually gives you enough time if you follow all these steps to thoroughly clean your hands. Having something like this up in the facility certainly helps to remind your staff the right way to go. And again, when to sanitize, always use sanitizer after washing with soap and water, and certainly before entering sensitive and high hygiene areas. At the start of the shift and when changing gloves, so if the gloves get soiled and you need to change your gloves, you have to wash and sanitize your hands again before putting the new pair on. So points to remember for hand hygiene: sanitizer doesn't work on dirty surfaces. At the moment, we're all being encouraged as we walk into shops to use hand sanitizer, but you know, if your hands are already dirty, their effect will be limited. So hands need to be visibly clean before applying the sanitizer. Dirty hands tend to protect microorganisms from the effects of sanitizer, and certainly if you've got any grease on your hands, that can act as a protective barrier for bacteria to multiply within. So gloves, yes, gloves are useful, but they are not magical. Many people seem to have the mindset that if they have gloves on, the food they prepare will always be safe. However, gloves can become contaminated just as easily as hands. If you don't wash your hands before putting on the gloves, or if you don't put them on properly, gloves could be contaminated with pathogens. I mean, I've seen people blowing blowing over the gloves to try to get them to inflate. You know, that's a big no-no. So your workers must wash their hands before putting on a new pair of gloves whenever you put on a new pair. Simply having gloves on doesn't mean the food being prepared will be protected from pathogens. Obviously, since gloves can become contaminated as well, just as easily as hands, they must be changed regularly. Only use gloves for one particular task, and you must discard them if they're damaged, or if your worker is interrupted during the task and then goes back to it, change the gloves. If they're performing the same task throughout the day, the gloves can really be changed sort of every 4 hours, because that's long enough for pathogens to multiply to dangerous levels. So more frequently than that would be good. Anytime the gloves become contaminated, they should be changed. So there's nothing in the gloves that stops contamination from transferring onto food if it's on the glove. So this can include if you touch a part of your exposed skin, hair, twitching your nose, that sort of thing, or if they perform a task not related to their food, such as taking out rubbish or moving the garbage bins, etc. And again, just a reminder, don't forget, must wash your hands before putting on a new pair of gloves. This is sneaked up on me. I just got another third and final poll today. This one's on hand hygiene. So the question is, has COVID-19 led to you increasing the number of times a day you wash and or sanitize your hands? So have your own personal practices changed, not just at work, but outside in normal life? Are we all becoming OCD? I am. I was before, but even more so now. So yeah, it's good to see. Just leave it on for a couple more seconds. Yeah, we're all OCD specialists now. Resounding 100%. Okay, thanks everyone. It's not just me. Okay, so sanitizers and disinfectants. So we routinely use chemicals to sanitize and disinfect product contact surfaces. These chemicals provide an essential control step to ensure that the foods produced and consumed are as free as possible from microorganisms that can cause foodborne illness. The difference between sanitizers and disinfectants is that to disinfect means to destroy or irreversibly inactivate specified infectious fungi and bacteria, not necessarily the spores, on hard surfaces. To sanitize means to reduce the microorganisms of public health importance to levels that are considered safe. This is based on established parameters and without adversely affecting either the quality of the product or its safety. So whilst disinfection measures may be employed in food processing and preparation, it's much more common to utilize sanitization methods to reduce the microbial presence. It's quicker and it fits better with the workflow. Neither of them obviously will work effectively unless they are applied as per the concentration and time specified in the instructions. So to be effective as a sanitizer, the product must be capable of reducing microbial load on direct food contact surfaces by 5 logs, which if you look at the graphic here, that's 99.999% of microbes. And this generally gets achieved within 30 seconds. On non-food contact surfaces, then it's generally, you're looking at a 3 log reduction, which is 99.9% within 30 seconds. So disinfectants, by contrast, must destroy or irreversibly inactivate all of the microorganisms within approximately 10 minutes of contact time. Now, there are some chemicals that can act as both a sanitizer and a disinfectant, with the contact time and concentration being adjusted depending on what it is that you're requiring. Obviously, there are many different types of sanitizers. There's enough for a presentation all on their own, such as hypochlorites, chlorine dioxide, iodophores, peroxyacetic acid, and the quaternary ammonium compounds, the QACs or quats. Over time, some microbes can develop resistance to sanitizers. Obviously, looking at the graphic, not all are killed. So if you look at the log reduction visual on this slide, starting with a starting point of 10 million microbes, a 5 log reduction in numbers, that's 99.999%, you're still left with 100 active, probably immune microbes. So should these then proliferate and form a biofilm, they can cause significant end product contamination issues. And once established, biofilms are really difficult to resolve. So if this situation arises in your facility, you'll first need to identify the specific organism, which will probably come up during your end product testing, and then select a disinfectant that's formulated to target that particular organism. So I've been in the food industry long enough to remember a time way back when people used to wipe down food contact surfaces with a rag or a cloth that they kept hanging from their belt. Thankfully, we don't see this anymore. Certainly not when I visit food production facilities or catering outlets here. But I do still check out the toilets before eating at a new restaurant. So we all know that visibly clean is not good enough because we can't actually see the contamination that makes our customers sick. The visual alongside the guy with the mop demonstrates the relative sizes of some common small things compared to an E. coli cell. And this is always quite a good visual to show your staff during hygiene training. An E. coli cell is 1 micron or 1 micrometer in diameter. And this big circle here is the diameter of a human hair. So although surfaces need to be visibly clean before sanitizing is effective, it's the sanitizing step that controls the microbial load on food contact surfaces and thus prevents cross-contamination with your products. Apart from human hands and clothing, the most dangerous part of the production facility is the part after a kill step's been applied. This is where any cross-contamination or introduction of contamination will have the biggest bang for its buck, as all the pathogenic any pathogenic bacteria introduced at this point will have no competition from any other microorganisms that may have been present before the kill step. A key part of getting the cleaning and sanitization process right is to plan it properly. This applies equally whether you're running a global food production company or starting up your own home-based business. So the more you can standardize the process and have clear, preferably written instructions, the better your outcomes will be. Cleaning, from a technical perspective, is the act of removing all of the dirt, the debris, grime and grease that can accumulate during production. Used detergents can help with breaking down the grease and fat, but detergents do not kill bacteria. So once the surface is thoroughly clean, then a sanitizer can be used to reduce the microbial load to a safe level. As we mentioned previously, sanitizers are ineffective on dirty or greasy surfaces, so a visual inspection prior to applying the sanitizer is recommended. And be aware that some sanitizers, specifically quartz, bleach and iodophores, are toxic and therefore need to be rinsed off. Others are food safe and don't require rinsing, for example, chlorine dioxide. And I know it sounds corny, but always check the labels on your chemicals for concentration and application instructions. And in larger facilities, if your cleaning team doesn't have a great understanding of English, ensure that the instructions are clearly and accurately translated for them and kept with the cleaning and sanitizing equipment. Some pointers for cleaning and sanitizing, effective cleaning and sanitizing, start at the back, work towards the front, start high and work down. Paper towels are better than cloths. If you're using brushes, ensure you have various sizes so that you can access all the little areas that require brushing. Take equipment apart before you start the cleaning process. If you're using a commercial kitchen, which is usually shared facilities, use the dishwasher for your small tools and utensils. If you're a home-based business, you can use 2 sinks to sanitize your utensils. Air dry wherever possible. Don't let waste pile up during production. Ensure you have large enough rubbish bins to cope the amount of waste that you produce. This is all part of the planning process. Keep all of your cleaning equipment well away from food and food contact surfaces. Obviously use color coding wherever possible. Keep tools separate from other equipment and from different areas. And finally, in this section, the table on this slide shows you how you can make your own bleach-based sanitizer. I won't read it all out, but just want to note the amount of chlorine required to effectively sanitize depends on the temperature of the water it's mixed with. So the hotter the water, the less bleach is needed. Also note the difference in chlorine content between household and commercial bleach. And this will have an effect on your concentrations required. Oh, food hygiene and COVID. So obviously we're all quite rightly concerned about the impact and effect of COVID-19 on businesses. You will have all had to change or tighten up on your processes and procedures to varying degrees over the past few months, certainly with regard to monitoring staff and visitors to your sites. State governments across the board pretty much have implemented restrictions and issued COVID safe plans for businesses that are still able to operate. And thankfully for most of us in the food industry, we've been able to continue with our businesses because obviously it's an essential business. Those of you in larger companies probably have devoted significant time to writing and reviewing these COVID safe plans. One question that sort of keeps coming up is whether you need to take any additional precautions to protect customers. Obviously, the first point to note is that COVID-19 as a respiratory disease, i.e. not a foodborne disease. And according to every global food safety agency, there are no direct food safety measures to take as a result of coronavirus in terms of food to human transmission. The virus is spread from person to person transmission, and the best way to protect your business and prevent spread within your facility or in your community is through good hygienic practices, i.e. all of the things that we've covered in the main body of this presentation. So frequent and effective hand washing, use of cleaning and sanitization programs, specifically targeting high touch areas, ensuring strict worker compliance with hygiene requirements. It's train, remind them. Increased personal hygiene and hand washing training. Excluding anyone from the facility with any symptoms of communicable disease. Introducing temperature checks, for example. These are recommended as an early warning sign of illness. If you haven't already done so, perhaps implementing contactless deliveries, ensuring that all your deliveries are scheduled so that you don't have multiple delivery drivers turning up at the same time. Where staff cannot maintain the correct or the recommended social distancing, ensure that wear protective face masks or that you've installed plexiglass screens, etc. Above all, business owners and managers and team leaders, you can set a great example to your teams and help calm their concerns by showing them that you practice good hygiene yourself. Hold regular team meetings to help answer questions, get feedback, especially where teams may not have English as a first language and may be struggling with the complexity and amount of information coming at them from the media. Keep the messaging simple, calm, and consistent. Which brings us to the final section of the presentation, the importance of culture in the success of any hygiene or food safety initiative. Culture comes from the top down. It's a set of practices, the way we do things around here. That's the culture in an organization. So it's important to let your teams know that food hygiene is everyone's responsibility, and that's from the CEO to the marketing department, down to the person who washes out the bins. If just one link in the chain is broken or overlooked or is not playing their part, there's a risk that the business will not be operating at its optimum in terms of food hygiene and safety. Owners, directors, managers, team leaders, they can all set a great example by being very visible in their own hygiene responsibilities. So in the past, I've worked for companies where the management enforced strict hygiene standards on the staff, but would then walk through the facility with a dirty coat and boots on, no hairnet, not washing their hands, chatting on the phone. Believe me, these things get noticed by staff. They have a detrimental impact on morale and consequently the hygiene standards of a business. Therefore, if you're a business owner or a manager, one of the best things you can do to help your teams is to visibly follow the rules and set the tone whenever you have the opportunity. Encourage teams to point out lapses in hygiene processes or areas which can be improved. Reward those who do the right thing wherever possible. Shared responsibility and accountability can quickly bring teams together to make substantial improvements that ultimately have a positive impact on culture, morale, and bottom line. Okay, always check your information. Check and double check your information sources if your business or health depends on it. Facebook posts are not necessarily the best source of information, and neither are presidents. Both can be misinformed or they can get things badly wrong, as this quote from Donald Trump shows. When asked about wearing a face mask, he claimed to have done so and thought it was okay. They looked like the Lone Ranger. For those of you who haven't heard of or don't remember the Lone Ranger, here he is. Which inevitably leads to my favorite COVID meme of the year so far. So thank you for that, Mr. Trump. Now, We don't actually have any questions submitted, so that's great. I will be sending out a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar later this afternoon or over the weekend. Just to remind you that our next webinar will be taking things one step further and focusing on food safety planning. So this was a bit of a warm-up for that one, really. I'll attempt to run through everything that you need to have in your food safety plan, including a look at HACCP, prerequisite programs, what to do with the plan once you have it on the shelf. And just a quick reminder that you can subscribe to Focus on Food using the link here. And that gives you access to all of the past webinar recordings, downloads, training templates, much more. So again, thank you very much for all of you for attending today. Thank you for your participation. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you in September. Thank you. Bye.